Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about my top 5 video games ever. I've been thinking about putting this list together for months, but I was never quite sure which ones to include. And then I realized I really had to go with the ones that were really influential for me and were also maybe the first of its type that I ever saw. The first either one of its genre or one with that feature. And not I was originally putting in the games I had played the most, I had the most hours in, but I decided to go with ones that I thought were the most influential and the ones I really remember and go back to. In this list, however, there is not a single game that is newer than 24 years old, and one of them is 44 years old. So strap in. The first one, I'm going to go chronologically, by the way. So these are my top 5, but I'm not going to tell you what the order is. This is chronological. My first game is from 1979, Star Raiders. This was the Atari 800 version. This game amazed me. This game is 3D. It is a true 3D game done in 8K. To put that in perspective, the Star Raiders clone that I made in Unity a few months ago, the executable alone is 639K, which is almost 80 times bigger. When you throw in the data, it's 500 meg, which is 62,000 times bigger. And when you put the project together, what it takes to build it in Unity, it's 6.5 gig, which is 812,000 times bigger than the original Star Raiders cartridge. Now, yes, some people may look at Star Raiders and go, wait, it's using sprites. Yes, it uses sprites for the ships and the asteroids and the photon torpedoes. But the game is in 3D. The locations are all calculated as 3D locations. When you rotate, it's doing correct rotations. When you shoot a photon, it's actually shooting it out into a 3D space and looking for intersections. It does do a little cheap sprite intersection thing that's part of the 6502. So sometimes you shoot a photon and it will go out, and even though the ship's really far away, it will go out and then immediately explode. I'll give you that one. Keep in mind this was done in 8K, so amazing. It was also done in assembly language and fit on a little teeny cartridge that you could plop in the machine. I was so amazed. I would think I was 14 years old when that came out. I was so amazed by it that I figured out how to pull the assembly off the cartridge, and I would pour over it. That game is what made me learn the Atari 800 technology, the different chipsets it had, the different graphics mode, the extended graphics modes, and assembly language, all of which led to me getting my first job. So I cannot not have this game on my list. The second game on my list is Ultima III Exodus from 1983. Although I will admit, I didn't play it until 1987. I was a little busy, but I'll go into that. This is the first Ultima I ever played. I hadn't played 1 or 2. I went back to the others after I played this, but Ultima 3 was my first love. It was my first RPG love, computer RPG. I loved party control. I loved the puzzles, including like figuring out how moon gates worked, because they didn't hold your hand in those older games. You had to figure all that stuff out. I figured out how to get marks in dungeons. The dungeons were in 3D. It was a top-down when you played the game, but the dungeons were 3D. The final confrontation with Exodus was amazing and surprising, and the whole thing was just great. As an aside, it was level scaled when you were outdoors. The things you ran into over land were scaled to your level, but dungeons were not. The dungeons had a fixed difficulty, usually pretty high. So if you went in early, you just got creamed. You just got destroyed. I liked that. My old, teenager brain noticed that, and it was in the back of my head the whole time. Like, oh, you can do different kinds of level scaling. You don't have to pick a level scaling model and apply it everywhere. So I like that. Now, I mentioned I didn't play it until the summer of '87. I was in engineering school when this thing came out, and I just didn't have time. And I was working a video game job. Well, that job, they didn't need me the summer of '87, and that was after I'd graduated from UVA and before I went to graduate school at UCI. So I spent the summer playing this game and gardening. My mom told me to do it. She said, hey, look, you're never going to have another summer off the rest of your life. Why don't you take the summer off and just relax? Because that's how cool she was. And I did. I gardened. Every morning I got up, checked on my garden, weeded it, talked to my 2 retired neighbors, Kelly and I don't know Mr. Burgess's first name, and Mr. Burgess. They would talk to me about what I was gardening. And then I would go inside and they'd play Ultima 3 the rest of the morning and the afternoon. Awesome summer. And then after I went to grad school, the next 2 years, when I was working on my master's, you have no free time. The master's is very intense. So since 1987, the summer of 87, have I played RPGs with better graphics? Yes. With better stories? Yes. With better characters? Of course. With better mechanics? Yes. But Ultima 3 is still better for me. It's the one I remember igniting the CRPG fire in me. So it had to be on the list. The next one, 1992's Star Control 2. I had played Star Control 1, which was just called Star Control. But I just played the 2-player combat mode. A friend of mine owned it, and we'd go and we'd play it. And it was super fun. It reminded me of Space War, which was a stand-up arcade game. But Star Control 2 was what exploded my brain case. It was non-linear in its storyline. It was open world, actually more than that, open galaxy. It had a great story, full of funny characters that were very memorable. A really dark storyline when you dug down in it. It was a funny game with a dark storyline. This game was a huge, huge influence on me for Fallout. I cannot understate how much Star Control 2 influenced Fallout. And while I loved playing the storyline, I also loved the combat and playing different ships against each other. That's what made combat so fun, was you had an armada, but you had to choose what ship to send in to fight their ship. And the different ships, it was like rock, paper, scissors. You had some ships, you're like, this ship is so weak, but it's really good against this type of ship. And the music in that game was phenomenal. I still hum the music today. Every now and then I start doing the XWing dirge in my head. It was such good set of music. Now, for people who think, well, it's weird this would be on a game. Well, Star Raiders wasn't an RPG. Ultima was. I consider Star Control 2 an RPG. If you consider the character is your ship, everything about it's an RPG. You upgrade the ship. You have hit points on it, which is your crew. And as I wrote in Philip Pepe's book, the CRPG book, I consider this an RPG. It's got every characteristic of an RPG. It just so happens that the player character is a ship. So that one's got to be on there. My fourth one is from the next year, 1993's Star Wars XWing. Yes, I played Wing Commander, but I loved Star Wars and the original trilogy. And I loved this game more. It just absorbed my mind. I went out and bought a joystick for my PC just to play this game. It was true 3D. And what I loved about it is what that meant was, and I suppose because Star Wars, all the ships are gray, so the fact that they were just usually flat polys, it didn't matter. They looked good. The X-Wing fighters and the TIE fighters looked good. But when they turned, they really turned. And in Wing Commander, because they were sprites, they went, which you kind of noticed but pretended not to. The Star Trek game that they were making at Interplay when I started, Star Trek 25th Anniversary, it had the same sprites that tilted like that, but X-Wing was true 3D, and I loved it. And the music and sound effects were spot on. They sounded right out of the movies. The weapons felt like they were from the movies. I loved that you had to balance power between the engines and the shields and the weapons, and that was under your control. It was just an amazing simulation of being in a starfighter. I loved it. I think I ended up playing it so much I wore out my joystick. And then the first GDC I went to in 94, I won a joystick at the Logitech booth. I forget what I did to win it, but I won it. And so I got a new joystick from that and kept playing X-Wing. And then my number 5, remember these are chronological, was 1999's EverQuest. Now, I've done a whole video about how I compare EverQuest to Elden Ring and how I fell in love with LPMuds, and I'll link those below. But EverQuest was my first experience playing a professional MMO, and it addicted me. It was big, huge world to explore, tons of lore. It was hard. It was fun. It was punishing, really punishing and really rewarding. It forced you into groups. I've talked about one of my groups was the Spicy Girls, where we all played a Spice Girl. I was Posh. I also had another group called the Necro Squad, which was all necromancers. And we just ran around. We discovered we go into zones way higher than we should have been able to because our skeletons we could just keep creating skeletons as they died. I also had a group called the All Hobbit group. I have a picture. It was a tribute to Samwise from Lord of the Rings. So we had Fred Wise. I was Fred Wise, Unwise, Harry Wise, Am I Wise, and Kent Wise. So I thought that was funny. Keep in mind, I was working like 14-hour days making Arcanum, and then I'd come home at night and play EQ for a few hours. I was totally addicted to this game. And I learned all the ways that a single-player game differed from an MMO in difficulty, in combat, in exploration, in how to tell a story. It was just a different experience. All of those mechanics of an RPG change when there's 1,000 players running around. Just how you give a quest, how you advance quests, whether players can hurt each other. All those had to be figured out, and EverQuest was my first experience. I hadn't played UO. I played UO a little bit, but I played it later. Those games had to figure all this out. And this game, EverQuest, directly led to me wanting to make an MMO, which led to me working on WildStar at Carbine. So it had to be on this list. Okay, so those are my top 5 video games, the most influential video games in my life. I'm sure you guys were hoping I'd list something else. Probably was in my top 10. But these are my top 5. And I think you can see influences of them in my games if you look hard. Anyway, hope you liked it.